Here's the pit, it's a big hole. Pushing that hole, that big MBI truck comes through, goes in there. He's got a net, thank goodness, that's tied down over the top of it so he won't, be littering down the road. And he heads up to Aubrey Acres Road off of 412 in Springdale. And how many trucks do you assemble?
We do 12 to 15 trucks a day. They're about 22 tons a truck. We are growing in Fayetteville, obviously, so we are getting a lot more waste. We are permitted at our transfer station to take 80,000 tons of waste. We are predicting that at the end of this year we're going to have close to 77,000 tons. So we're pushing our permit capacity. We'll probably have to ask for expansion on that. So, but that's what you get with growth in the community. And a lot of businesses. A lot of construction debris, got a lot of private haulers from out the county use this facility. All of our residential waste, commercial waste comes in here, so it's a very, very busy place. If you've ever been there, during Monday through Friday, say around 9 to 10 or 11 to 12 o'clock, if you're not careful, you might get run over, because it is.
All right, now to maybe one of my favorite trash stories. So after it goes there, it goes up to Echo Vista. I never thought about the name, the Green View.
I know.
It's like, they do a good job up there. They've got a double liner in the bottom of the landfill. They've got engineers coming out there every day looking at their methane to oxygen ratio, which, before I step too far ahead of myself, trash goes in the ground, right, in a big hole. What happens to it there?
Decomposes.
What decomposes?
The organics.
The organics. Anything that's from a plant or an animal decomposes, right? They have to cover this every day. They're required by regulation to put a daily cover on it. So, and also, there's a bulldozer about as tall as the ceiling with steel spiked tires about as tall as me that runs over. They've got two of them, I think, out there, and they run over them to compact and to get that airspace out. Well, I need the biology or the chemistry nerds here. What happens when you, I don't know, you make a compost pile or you put food scraps and paper, things that would decompose, and you pull the oxygen out? What happens? It becomes anaerobic. It goes without oxygen. And who knows what the byproduct of anaerobic decomposition is? What the important one, what we're thinking about is methane. Go sorry. Methane, CH4, right? Methane is, you'll get different numbers on this, but when they produce the methane, they're actually really good at getting it out. They have a gas capture system. They can pull that stuff out, right? But where do you think some of that methane goes? Right up there with the carbon dioxide. And it's much, 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 much more potent as a greenhouse gas. About 25 times is the most common number I've seen. It's short-lived, 12, 15 years, something like that, but it's very potent as a greenhouse gas. Now, I've heard numbers from their tech that says they can catch from the lined areas of the landfill about 98% of that methane in this landfill. That's good. That's really good.
What do they do with it?
The methane, they send it through a pipe system. It goes into this room about half the size here with these gigantic cruise ship engines, and they pump the energy, electricity, straight into the grid. They take the methane and they turn it into electricity, and that can fuel somewhere in the neighborhood of about 3,500 homes. So a town the size of Prairie Grove.
For a year, I believe is what they said.
Yeah. It's an impressive technology. You go in there and they've got these huge engines. So that's good. I mean, we didn't used to do this back in the 70s, 80s. The methane was just going up. Now you still run into a lot of old problems with old landfills because the liner's not good or there's not a liner. We've come a long way with the technology.
And methane migrates, doesn't it?
Migrates?
Mm-hmm. So if you've got an old dump,
Mm-hmm.
then you may have methane migrating through.
Yeah,
Yeah, if you
So
got
if
an
you build
old,
something on top of an old dump, you could have methane.
yeah, like
Oh, yeah.
old dumps without the liners, they've had it show up people's basements before and stuff like that.
Yeah,
Yeah,
it's
Yeah.
not something you wanna build a plant on.
right.
Is there a byproduct, in where it goes through to the grid?
well,
Because
it goes in straight into
methane-
methane.
When they burn the methane, then you do that CO2, you know, just like products.
Right. And when they do the CO2.
Well, you think that, just like a car.
So it's released into the.
The atmosphere.
But now, can I jump in?
Yeah, go for it.
So, all the big landfills across the country, they're the Clean Air Act, it's 1990, addressed methane, because they used to often methane wherever, it just went, and then they started realizing in the early 90s, or well, before that, I guess, that it was a greenhouse gas, and they started requiring air permits. So all these big landfills like this across the country have codified air permits now. And so, they have to do something with methane. So, they have to collect it. So, in all disclosure, it's not just out of the goodness of waste management's heart, they have to do something with it, because it's a problem.
Right.
So, if they didn't have the big power generation, they would have to flare it. Because, yeah, we burn it, and like if the systems, they get peaks and valleys, and so you'll see the flare run sometimes even now. Or if they're doing maintenance on turbines, they'll flare it. But you have to flare it, because by burning the methane, turning it into CO2 and oxygen, water vapor, which is product of combustion, that's better than methane.
A lot
I think it's
better.
so bad that you don't want to, methane, it'd be better to burn it. But what WM did and some others in around the country, they put in generation systems, so now we just capture the energy. That's what I explained later.
I have a question.
Sure.
A couple years ago, I read about the manure pile on one of the stockyards that caught on fire 20 years ago, but it was still on fire. And because of the methane of the decomposition, is it still on
I
fire?
don't know.
Is that the St. Louis? Is that the St. Louis?
Yeah,
Oh, that's the landfill that's next to the nuclear.
No, it's a stockyard, and it's this humongous mountain of manure. And it had been burning for years and years, and I was just wondering if it had gone out finally.
So, I don't know. I haven't heard that. I'm
And it
kind of
was the
curious now,
methane.
though. Important clarification here, I think. Look at EPA charts, look at independent charts of methane production by source. Landfills are small. They're single digit. It's like 6% or something, 4 or 6%. Anybody know what the biggest sources of methane are? Livestock and
Is it what they say?
livestock, cow farts.
And the manure went grass down.
There's another one, coal and gas production.
Oh.
It's big on the chart there for human sources of it. So, there's a lot of different things, and actually termites. I was looking at this graph and I'm like, termites release a lot of methane. But I would have never known that. Okay. So this is the stuff that I wanted to get to with y'all, because I think that getting the big picture stuff and telling kids about it and telling other people about it is where those shifts are going to happen, I think. So we're talking about a linear system. Somebody said earlier, an open system. Our economy, the way we buy things and throw them away, works like an open system, a linear system. It goes one way. We pull it out of the earth, we pull the metal, the oil, the whatever. You make your raw materials for it somewhere. You turn it into a product. Here's your PET bottle, and then you throw it away. It's going in one direction. But the earth itself is not an open system. It's closed. We have so much matter and so many materials in here, and we have to use those in a way that doesn't deplete them ultimately. That's a shift for a lot of people, and I realize that because I studied this stuff when I was in college and later, but that is not the way we operate currently. What we're trying to do, and what a lot of companies and a lot of municipalities are trying to do, is to move to this, a zero waste system, a closed system, Another way they say it's cradle to cradle. The first cradle is, you know, you pull the bauxite or the oil out of the ground, and then you turn it into an aluminum can, and then you recycle that can in Fayetteville, and then you drink out of it again, and it just goes around and around and around, right? That's a closed system. We're getting there. It's happening in a lot of places. And the thing that I have learned a lot is there's not just one, there's not a silver bullet for this. It takes everyone. It takes industry, it takes citizens, it takes kids, it takes communities, because we live in a very complex economy. So it takes everyone. I thought this was a cool graphic here. It just gives you some of the ideas of how can we do this. Well, what if you walked into this, actually is true in Germany, what if you could see how much this package costs you when you bought the cottage cheese? What if the price of that was transparent? Because you're paying for the packaging, right? They're not giving you that for free. But what if you required the producer to tell you how much it was? Not as like out of spite, but just to be transparent with it. So this is
shocked that they didn't even have to.
well, yeah, I mean, I'm not paying for that. I don't want a bunch of plastic.
Is this what Walmart's starting to require, or is this what Fayetteville's working with Walmart on in packaging?
Packaging?
I haven't heard anything about labeling packaging, but, I mean, we're changing a lot of the date labels on food to be best if used by, so that you're not throwing it away because you think it's an expiration date. So they're doing that on all of the private brands and trying to work with their suppliers on everything except like safety products and others, so. But I haven't heard anything about labeling pricing.
The packaging thing that Louise, what you're talking about, when Walmart came to us, they wanted to see what was in our bin system that people keep putting in there, thinking is recyclable, that we don't take as recyclables. They couldn't see that in the single stream system because it was just picked up in the paper way. In our system, since you sort of heard, we were an opportunity where they could look at that and see. They asked us, what do you see the most often? And they wanted to know what the packaging was and what the product was.
Which
So-
way are you saying it was stuff that was being recycled that couldn't be or thrown away?
Right, so in our program, the green bins, our drivers come, they pick up the green bin, they sort it into the truck. Walmart asked us to look and see and tell them, okay, so what products do you see in there all the time that people are putting in there to be recycled that we don't take in your system, that we don't take? So our drivers for a while were going through there, the Simply Orange large containers, number 7. Looks like that. But it's number 7. Those types of things, and we had this whole list of products. And so they were taking that information to go back to the manufacturers of those products and say, look, you're making your products and you're putting them in this packaging that cannot be recycled.
I hate.
What would it take for you guys to put it into a package that can be recycled in the majority of recycling programs? So that's what,
But I want to say thank you to Fayetteville for having run an honest program where you only took in the bin those things that you actually had a market for. Because so often we hear people say, well, I came from so-and-so place and they took everything. And people don't understand, just because you put it in a bin doesn't mean it gets recycled. And there are a lot of recycling programs that are fraud programs. So I'm hoping we start seeing some lawsuits around fraudulent recycling programs.
Yeah, transparency is important. What can you say?
Some of our local brewers, like Fossil Cove, have the product that they put in their cans in the 6-packs. They went out of their way to make those plastics that hold the cans together, number 2 plastic.
Yeah.
Yes.
And we would put it in our recycling bin, and the recycle guy would not take it. And my husband finally said, stop putting it in the recycle bin, put it in the trash because they won't take it. And you know, it just, what's, can you give me some insight?
Prelude to day 2. Go ahead.
Yeah, Justin said this earlier. about the plastics being the hardest to educate people on, and it really is. Because people that don't work in recycling or don't have an understanding of what can be recycled believe plastic is plastic. It doesn't matter, it's plastic. It's recycled, right? It's plastic. Whether that's a tub or this is.
That's a number 5, right? Those are usually 5s.
So, the plastics are the hardest to educate people on because the mills that buy the plastics from places like Fayetteville, they're real particular. They only want bottles. And the reason why is when you recycle plastics, it's a melt process. And when you, so this right here is called injection molded. This is called blow molding. Number 1 plastic, number 1 plastic. What's the problem? Why can't we put these together, bale them up in a bale, send it to the mill, have them recycle all this stuff together? Why can't we do that? Well, it starts with when these things were made. This injection molded plastic here is actually a mold that they'll pour the plastic into, and it sets up, and it hardens in the shape of this container. They use chemicals for that to make it set up and harden, keep that shape. This bottle starts out looking like a little test tube, and they're going to heat that up, and they're going to force air into it, out into the shape of the mold, and this is the shape of the mold of this particular brand. They didn't add those chemicals to this. So when you put these two together, and you sell it to a recycling facility, a mill, they're going to take it and they're going to grind it up. So this is going to be ground up, this is going to be ground up. In that process, the lids and the paper will be removed. This flake is actually a little bit heavier than water, it sinks. This will sink too, it'll all go together. Clean it and wash it, and then they'll kind of melt it. When they melt it, that's when you have the problem. Because this does not melt at the same temperature as this. And earlier I was explaining a little bit about the best analogy I can think of is when you go get your frozen food from the store, that black tray, that's a number 1 plastic. Look at it. Same thing at the bottom. But what they've done is they've added chemicals to that, so when you stick it in the microwave, it's not going to melt into your food. If you stick this into a microwave, it's going to melt. So there's a perfect example. It's the same plastic, but it's same plastic resin, but it's not the same when you're trying to recycle.
One thing I'd like to mention, one reason I asked how many people work in Fayetteville is, if you go to Springdale or Rogers, Bentonville, they may have different rules, because some of them will take other number 2s besides bottle grade, blow grade, and some of them will take number 1 clamshells. And so the market that they're selling it to, it's a lower, it's a degraded market. So like Brian's getting a better price for bottle grade or blow grade number 1s than these other guys get for the next grade. They're still getting it, selling it to the mill somewhere, but then it's all going to get turned into the lower grade stuff. Where Brian's selling good stuff, then it saves good stuff.
But we also have stuff going to China that little children sort through. I think it's real important that we get real transparent about what's going on in every recycling program.
Yeah, when you give it the 3 through 7s, that's when it really gets right.
Just so people are aware, and what we do in Fayetteville is we sell our material on the spot market. There's mills in the southeastern part of the United States that take number 1 plastics and number 2 plastics, and that's where our material goes to. We don't send anything overseas.
First place I lived in my life was about the place that does not accept glass as recycling. Why is that?
Glass is very problematic to recycle because of a lot of issues. It breaks, it can contaminate a lot of other material that it gets in contact with. But the value of it, and this is kind of tricky, the value of it's not very high. You really see the savings on glass when you sell it back to, or it goes back to a glass processor, because then they get energy savings from melting that glass as opposed to using virgin materials. So there's an energy saving factor with glass that is very strong, and that's why people want to recycle it.
Fayetteville does.
But Fayetteville, we collect our glass. We have a company in Kansas City called Ripple Glass that will come down and actually pick it up from us and haul it back up there. So the city does not incur any transportation costs for doing that. We don't get paid for that glass because the value of glass is just not very strong. But we don't have to pay to send it anywhere. So we're able to do that. And the nice thing about that market up there in the Ripple Glass is they don't care what color it is. Because in their process, they're going to run it through, crush it up, and have a contract with Home Corning, that which is also in Kansas City, to make fiberglass insulation. Brown glass, they will optically sort out, and they will send that to a mill in Oklahoma and makes brown beer bottles. And Boulevard Beer gets those bottles back and puts their beer in it, which is Kansas City beer. And they actually own a portion of Ripple Glass. And so it's this closed loop system for them. So they came on the scene probably about 5, 6, 7 years ago. And it's just been wonderful to work with them. Because before we had to separate glass by color, and it went to a facility in Oklahoma. It's very cumbersome to separate, keep different colors together. We couldn't do commercial recycling of glass. Now we can go to our entertainment district on Dixon Street and get up containers of glass, and they just throw the glass in these containers and we can recycle that. So it's really made it a lot easier for us. A lot of communities won't take the glass because they have, like what they call single stream collection, which I think nothing hides in my head.
Roger has that. Roger.
And they don't want the glass in that because it breaks and then you can't get it out.
Right. Another thing I think that impacts glass, my son and his family lived in Farmington for a while, and he told me that with the exception of Fayetteville, no city in Washington County will accept glass because they use inmates to separate the material. Are you familiar with that?
West Fork takes it,
Does it?
because they use the West Fork facility, and they take glass.
Yeah, I was about to say West Fork and then the Gray Road has a drop off. If you find drop-offs,
Yeah.
you'll find
Yeah, that's
the
different.
ability to take drop-offs. Curbside collection of glass in those areas might be.
Yeah, that was true. Side.
But when you say inmates sorting it, I don't necessarily think that's true because the material from these communities typically goes up to Rogers to a private recycler up there, Mark Recycling. I don't think that they use inmate labor.
No.
When I lived in Rogers, they didn't take glass, and I called and asked them why. And this was 7 years ago, and they told me it was a safety issue because it breaks.
Yeah. So
And it
people,
was, and their recycling people, it was.
sort lines and stuff.
You ground the
We do not. No, we break it into what they call a cullet, which is about an inch long piece of glass. We'll bust it up into that size, but we don't grind.
Do you mind if I talk a little bit on the glass? You know, since we've kind of addressed all this, but like Brian says, theirs isn't all mixed, so their glass stays separate, just like drop off. Their glass is separate, and you don't have people handling it, worried about cuts, but like in, a material recovery facility like up in Rogers, where you got people manually sorting stuff, they don't want glass, because you're gonna have injuries and stuff. And as a general rule, single stream facilities like West Memphis has one in Little Rock, they generally don't have glass, but the problem there is politics gets involved, and the city contracts say, we want you to do glass because it's so heavy, they get big diversion numbers. So they say, oh, you're gonna do glass if you want this contract. So then the Murphy gets stuck taking glass, and now they gotta deal with glass, and it's, contaminated, it contaminates the paper, and it contaminates everything else, and, it takes, more equipment to separate it, and they may or may not have that equipment at this particular emergency, so there's some politics like that gets involved where the city says, if you want the contract, you'll take glass. Or if you want the contract, you'll take number 2, not just bottle break, but you'll take, number 2 toys. You'll take number 1 climate, so there's some things like that that come into play, and that's why another reason why every city takes a rule. different contracts, different contractors, different service providers. So it's not a one size fits all, it's challenging.
Technology is changing all the time. We're hearing now about systems that are in single stream operations that if you put a needle on the front end can recover about 90–95% of the glass and make it marketable. Problem with that is it's very expensive. And you're not going to get a lot of the facilities to put that in, or you have to do a lot of arm twisting to get it. So it's kind of a hit and miss in glass across the country because we're actually pretty close to the glass market. A lot of people in the country are not. And so it would be very costly for someone to do. And then how you process those materials also plays into that.
So, how many people are not going to be here Wednesday night? Anybody not going to make Wednesday night? I had a couple things I wanted to say if somebody wasn't going to be.
I may not be able to make it work.
Okay. So I want to come back around to this too, because y'all see how complicated the recycling process gets. There's a lot of intent. Plastic is really complicated. And who's talking about this?
You.
Exactly. Yeah, I mean, this is kind of, this is our redirect here because people don't talk about it. I mean, there are certain circles and doing education programs, we bring this stuff up. And I don't want anyone to come out with a message or come out with thinking that I'm trying to put down recycling at all. But let's go back to the solid waste hierarchy of the 3 R's. Where is it on that hierarchy? It's at the bottom of the 3 R's. It's way above, not to confuse, it's way above landfilling or incineration. The savings and resources, but it's still just the 3rd best option on that hierarchy. And that is something that, it's a message that has not made it through for the most part.